Our planet is a lonely speck in the great cosmic dark.
We're on a rock hurling through the universe. Planet as an organic spaceship.
Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand.
Hi, this is Chrissy.
And I'm Marie.
And you're listening to Alt.Pop.Repeat,
A show where we get into the nitty-gritty around counterculture, alternative culture, and sync it up with what?
with pop culture.
Yeah, man. That's what we do.
There we go.
Guess what year it is? Guess.
I'm hoping that it's 1995 because I don't want it to be 2021.
You don't want to. You want to go back to 1995.
I do because that was the year that Gangsters Paradise sold over 6 million copies worldwide. That's exactly the point that I want to go back to in time.
Obviously, because you were a child that was interested in commerce, I personally would be like, if we went back to 1995, I don't know how comfortable I am re-entering a stage in my life where I relied on allowance from my parents. I kind of like the freedoms that I have right now and the nostalgia that comes with listening to Gangsters Paradise. As I said, it takes me back to a time.
So let's segue. Who is our guest today, Marie?
Coolio! That's who we're talking to.
It is. We got to talk with Coolio about 90s hip hop and the influence we see today in pop culture.
Let's just do it. Let's just get right into the interview. And then in the end, we do what we do best, and that's
Sync it up.
As I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I take a look at my life and realize there's nothing left. Cause I've been blasting and laughing so long that even my mama thinks that my mind is gone.
I got the name Coolio from my homies bagging on me. You know, I used to try to play guitar. And at the time, I only knew how to pick out one song, which was Jose Feliciano's "Come On Baby, Light My Fire." And my homies walked in while I was playing it, and I didn't see them. I was looking down at my guitar, and I looked up, and they were standing there, and my homie started laughing at me, and he said, "Look at Cuz think he Jose Felice, no, Cuz think he Julio Iglesias." And my other, nah, that ain't Julio, that's Coolio Iglesias. And they started laughing, bagging, and of course, I was like, "Fuck y'all." And then the next day, I have to tell you what I was wearing. I was wearing some white khakis. I had on a white Western shirt, the ones with the little flap that goes all the way around with the mother of pearl buttons.
Yeah.
And I had that on, and they was just bagging on me. I had on a Billy. Do you know what Billy Jack is? Who Billy Jack is?
No, I don't.
Billy Jack was a Native American that knew karate, and he was in this movie called 110 Soldier. I had a Billy Jack hat on, so the homies was just bagging, really. So the next day I walk outside, and we getting ready to go play some football against another neighborhood. And everybody was standing across the street from my house. And somebody said, "Coolio!" And I got across the street. I was like, "Man, my name ain't Coolio, man. Cut that shit out." So I resisted it for, a couple weeks, and it didn't go away. So I became Coolio.
Wow.
If you could have had any other nickname, have you thought about this extensively? Do you know what that nickname would be if it wasn't Coolio?
No. I mean, my original hood name was Old Man.
Why?
They used to call me.
You seem like a very youthful individual. Why Old Man?
Well, when I was younger, when I was a kid, I was a very bad asthmatic, and people said my shoulders just kind of hunched because I was always having trouble breathing or whatever. And I read books a lot, and I was kind of, I guess at that time I was kind of introverted. And not only that, I was a little insecure about myself. And so I always tried to make myself look small. And So I guess, they said I look like a little old man. And, the homies used to bag on me. They used to call me old man. They used to bag on me hardcore, too.
Well,
Hardcore.
I hope you didn't let them get away with it.
Oh, I was out for many years. I was a bully child. I got bullied from probably kindergarten to the 7th grade.
Wow.
And then, 7th grade, that's when you start, that's when little boys start liking little girls. We start thinking about having a girlfriend and getting kisses and shit. So you got to stand up. I don't know how it goes in a lot of neighborhoods, but in black neighborhoods, if you the kid that's getting picked on, strapped upside the head, getting your lunch money took and all that, you're not finna get no girlfriend. You might get a girlfriend, but you're not gonna get the one you want. You're gonna get the one that nobody else wants. And so, I started, 7th grade, actually the summer going from 7th to the 8th grade, just when I started, I took Taekwondo, I took a boxing class at the Y. And I started wrestling with one of my homeboys who was a state champion wrestler. And that whole summer, that's all I did was work on my fighting skills. So when we got back to school in 8th grade, when school started back, I started, man, I probably had more fights than Mike Tyson. Every day. Started carrying a gun and
Wow.
bringing a butcher knife to school and all kind of shit, man. I was wilding. But getting bullied, it either gives you character and turns you into something good, or it turns you into something bad. Because I know a lot of people that got bullied and they didn't handle it well, and they hurt people.
So how did you make the transition from like bullying, aggression, that into music?
Well, first of all, I started fighting back. And after a while, I wasn't getting picked on as much. And, then it got to a point where I started fighting back so hardcore that, people didn't want to have no problems with me because I was a bully killer. I was hard on a bully. I went hard on them. I tried to hurt them because after all those years, I think I kind of blanked out for a while. I wasn't myself. I was actually I grew up wanting to be Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and I wanted to be a black leader, and I went gangster. I'm from a small neighborhood as well, and in my neighborhood, you gotta join. You gotta be from the hood. If you don't have any older brothers, or if you don't have a situation, if you don't play sports really well, or if it's got to be something to keep you from joining the gang in my neighborhood, because it's such a small neighborhood. They need every man. So you either gonna gang, you either join the gang or you get beat by them. It wasn't really I didn't have a choice. I had to gang bang. I had to be from the hood because that's just how it is in my neighborhood. And so I started rapping. I started rapping when I was around 15. I met some cats from New York. They moved across the street from me in Compton. DJ D, a guy, his name is Denard. A guy by the name of Gerald Valentine, we call him Wiz Kid. And then Richie C, which is my homeboy Richard. And, they was all from Brownsville. And I was actually fascinated by the DJ, by DJ D. He was a really, really, really great DJ at the time. And I was fascinated by that. So I became his record boy. I used to carry the records to the party. They give a brother $20 or whatever. I helped carry the records, helped carry the equipment. And one day, then another cat moved to the neighborhood. A Puerto Rican cat named Juan. He was a pretty boy. So every girl that I liked him. So I was a little salty about that. And they made I don't know if you know what a pause button mixtape is. A pause button mixtape is when you know what that is? It's when you play one little section of a song, kind of like how they mix, but you put it on a cassette. So you play it a little bit, rewind, and then you go back to that spot, and then you put it back until you make a beat. And we got one take. You got one track. Everybody had to go after each other, and so they made this tape anyway. Everybody went outside to smoke weed, and like I said, I used to read a lot. I always had a book in my hand, so I was sitting inside reading, and Juan came in to rewind his part. He must have rewinded his part about 10 or 15, 20 times. And then he looked at me and said, "Hey, that's fly, right?" That's when we used to say fly. He said, "That shit is fly, right?" And I told the truth. I said, "It's all right." He said, "All right, I don't even know why I'm asking you. You don't know how to rap anyway. Your opinion don't even count." I said, I don't have to know how to rap to have an opinion. I said, that's okay. It's nothing spectacular. He said, "Wow, man, I ain't worried about you. You do it then." I said, "Bruh," I could write something like that in 15 minutes and I don't even rap. He said, "Do it then." I did it. And I served him with my very first verse. First verse I wrote in my life. 80. I can't remember that verse, so they asked me. But and so that was it. And I just, I was hooked. And I think the Sugar Hill wasn't it for me. It was the first rap song one of the first rap songs I heard. But you have to understand, because I met some cats from New York, I was privy to underground stuff that other people weren't hearing, because these cats had a bunch of mixtapes, and so I heard MC Booski, I heard Love Bug, Starsky, early stuff. I heard Grandmaster Caz, just freestyling in the park. All these things that everybody else didn't get to hear. All they heard was Sugar Hill Gang. But I think what really got me was when I heard Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. Specifically, I heard Melly Mel. When I heard Melly Mel spit, that made me. I wanted to rap. I wanted to be raw. I wanted to be a rapper. So it just, and I never rapped with the intent to be famous, or I'm not even sure to make records at the time when I started rapping. I just rapped because I loved it. I just loved hip hop. I wanted to be a part of it. It made me feel like I was a part of something bigger than myself. And I just, and I was a natural. It was easy for me. I was a pretty intelligent kid. I got straight A's for a long time. And then, I went from straight A's to straight F's because I started gang banging, smoking weed, drinking, fighting, not going to school, and all that shit. But that's another story. Anyway,
Well, can I ask you too? During that time too, when you signed with Tommy Boy Records, when all of that, because you were in your 30s when that happened, but I think in your rap, you were saying that you were 23, going on 24, but you were in your 30s, correct?
I think when I first signed with Tommy Boy, I was either 28 or 29 when I first signed. By the time my record came out, I think when my record came out, I was 29. And when I made Gangsters Paradise, I had just turned 30.
Right. And when you signed with Tommy Boy, when you did It Takes a Thief as the record, they give you a $50,000 advance to do that. And you made, didn't they say you were going to make an EP, but then you made a full album, right?
Originally, they gave me $25,000.
Right.
They gave me $25,000 to make a single, and we took that $25,000, and I think we did about 4 or 5 songs with that. The first day I went in the studio, I did 3 songs right off the bat. I knocked out 3 songs in 8 hours. We knocked out 3 of them. So then we had another studio session the next day, and I think the next day I knocked out 2 more. So we turned in probably about 3 of those or 4 of those, and they was like, "Damn, okay, you doing it like that? Okay." They gave me another $25,000 and said, "Make an EP."
Right.
And we took that $25,000. We finished the album pretty much. Because the next time I went in the studio, I knocked out 3 songs, and the next day I knocked out 3 more songs. So that was 11 songs right there. They was like, "Damn, okay, you got something." They gave me another $75,000, which made $125,000. They gave us another $75,000. And we finished the album. We mixed and mastered and the whole thing. And I think after we paid the lawyer, manager, studio costs, I think we were left with about 35 or 40,000. And me and DJ Wino, we split that.
How did you stretch your money? How did you do that? Because it's really hard for artists to do that at times. And even now it's still hard for them to, what was your strategy behind that to make the money go longer and farther and be able to make that album?
We didn't go into the studio until we were absolutely ready. Till we had the songs down pat. We knew exactly. We had all our time planned out. Okay, we're going to go in, we're going to lay the beat. We're gonna do this, and then I'm gonna lay the verse, and we put ourselves on a timer. So, if I was, on the first song, if I was going to Wino, say, "Come on, man, you gotta get this song done, bro, so we get to the next one." So I was just knocking them out, and I had everything. I knew exactly what I was gonna do when I walked into the studio. It wasn't no creating in the studio. It was knowing what you was gonna do at that time, because 2-inch tapes. Okay, that was a 2-inch tape. It was about that thick and about that big. For a lot of people, if you've never seen one, they cost about, a brand new one costs $450, and that's what you had to record on. And the max amount of songs you could get on there was about 3 songs. So, you do 17 songs. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
you gotta
totally.
pay for it, and then you had to pay for studio. The studio, I think at that time, was about $1,200 a day, and then you also had to pay your engineer about $30 to $50 an hour, and so that shit starts adding up.
Yeah, it does. It really does.
And then the mastering costs, I think mastering was around, depending on how many songs you had and how much stuff they had to do, anywhere from $20 to $100,000 to master. So, I mean, it was very costly. And so we just tried to make everything cost effective, and so that we can have some money in our pocket.
Wanted to ask you, moving away from dollars for a second, and to ask you a question about just a comparison. What is the significant difference, do you feel, between rap and hip hop in the 80s versus in the 90s when you had your main success?
I think a lot of things got better. The production got better. The process got better. The drums got stronger. They went from the 909 to the 808, which had that heavy bass. Producers started learning how to tweak stuff in the studio to just make everything sound better. We started being more creative. We was more creative in using our voices different. The drum machine came along as well. So in the beginning, it was just, people would take a loop and loop it and put it on tape back to back, and then have somebody play over it or not. And then the drum machine came along, and it took away the need for having a full band in the studio and stuff like that. If you listen to a lot of that early Curtis Blow stuff, that shit was all done with a live band. That was done with a full band. So we just learned how to do things different, and it just made it sound more original, I think. It made it sound more like that's when hip hop truly became its own genre, because it wasn't about, you didn't have to have, it wasn't like a R&B song anymore. It was hip hop, became true hip hop. Now, not saying that the 80s stuff wasn't true hip hop, because I think the drum machine did come out in the mid 80s, if I'm not mistaken. But, you know, I think things just got more refined. It became more refined. It became the process. You know, everybody knew what you had. You know, you had a way to a set way to do things. You know, engineers got better as well, so they knew how to engineer hip hop. Because in the beginning, all the engineers, you have to understand, came from a rock background. Right. So you had all these rock engineers. They didn't know how to engineer hip hop. They didn't know how to get that heavy bass sound. You had the cats in New York that had the mastering studio, and then on the West Coast we had Bernie Grundman. And you know, in order to get that. See, if you go back and you listen to a lot of old records, listen to the records from the West Coast and the records from the East Coast. They were completely different. The records from the East Coast sounded a lot better because they had more experience with mixing and mastering than they did on the West Coast.
And you did call the West Coast, in a quote I watched from, call the West Coast like kind of dumb. Why was that? Like, why did you think that? And it doesn't mean you think it now, but
you know, it wasn't really that. It wasn't so much that. It's just that the people that were getting record deals on the West Coast, before Cube and NWA, they just lyrically, they didn't have the savvy, and they didn't have the flow that the East Coast did. You have to understand, Rakim was one of the very first MCs to start rapping in his natural speaking voice. Before that, everybody used to rap like this. My name is Coolio. Everybody tried to put that, you know, that, I don't even know what you call that shit. I don't even know how it's called, but Melly Mel and the Furious Five, they started. They used to rap. Some of them rapped in their natural speaking voice as well, but Rakim mastered it. Rakim mastered rapping in your natural speaking voice, and he made it cool. MC Shan rapped in his natural speaking voice, but his voice had a high pitch, so it didn't sound as masculine and manly as Rakim did. So, you know, I mean, that's just from that's how I learned. That's where I learned from. That's where my whole thing came from. And then you had the message came out, and it became cool to rap about what was actually going on in your neighborhood, and, you know, stuff that you might see. And then NWA came out and took it to the next, you know, Cube took it to the next level. He started rapping about what was really going on in the neighborhood, and, you know, coming at it and being raw, like not being afraid to curse and say the real words and say the things that everybody wanted to say. Cube was like the voice of the hood, of every hood all over America. He was the voice of the inner city. That's why NWA was so popular, because Cube was saying all the shit that everybody really wanted to say, but were scared to say it.
Right.
And
you know,
to go on that makes me want to ask you, is that, how can I word this nicely? Is that the significance of rap culturally? Is that as an art form, it is like this, the poetry of a culture, a moment in time that people can kind of rally around, a voice given to those who didn't typically have a voice within the mainstream.
I think that's what was in the beginning, you know. But you know, you got people rapping about all kinds of things. Now, even me, like I tried to not. I didn't want to be Cube because Cube was Cube. I had to find, I tried to find a different way to present myself as an MC. I put myself in situations. I tried to attack things from what I call the 7-sided perspective, which is rapping from the perspective of a black man, rapping from the perspective of a white man. I mean, viewing a song from that perspective, from the perspective of a woman, the perspective of a young girl, the perspective of a young boy, and the perspective of a mother and a father. So I tried to come at hip hop from all those different angles, also not being afraid to make fun of myself and put some, not necessarily comedy into it, but just putting some humor into it and not being so hardcore, because it was enough people doing that. It was, I wanted to stand out. I wanted to set myself apart from other people. So I just tried to put something in it that I hadn't really heard yet. I hadn't, when the way I approached writing songs, I hadn't heard the things I was doing. I hadn't heard people doing yet. Of course, I did take from everybody. I took from KRS-One, I took from NWA, I took from Melly Mel, I took from Curtis Blow. But as far as, and then another thing, I think that was different about some of the things I did. I approached every song as something individual, and not trying to. I tried to make it a point to never sound the same on a song. If you go back and listen to a lot of my stuff, I didn't use the same style on any songs. Like it was something different. Okay, if you listen to a Jay-Z song, it's Jay-Z. Jay-Z has that certain way of flowing. That's the way he raps. Let me give you another, for instance. Who else? Cube also did that. Cube used a lot of different styles in a lot of songs. But if you take Jay-Z raps the same way on most of his songs. He switches styles sometimes, but most of the time you're gonna get that Jay-Z flow. Rakim as well. Most of Rakim's songs, it's him because he raps a certain way. He either speeds up the cadence or slows down the cadence, but it's usually, it was always it was the same flow most of the time. Well, I every song was something different to me. So I tried to not ever rap the same on any song. And I think even now I still do that. I change my flow up all the time. A lot of, especially a lot of the new stuff I'm doing, people gonna be like, damn, that's Coolio. They're not gonna realize it's me because of the way I approach it.
Can I go back to Perceptions too, where we talked about, so when you first went on tour, Canada was your first tour with Ice-T. And then you went and did, you sold out 5 shows, the first hip hop artist to sell out 5 shows in Australia. And then you were the first hip hop artist to do a show.
8
Sorry?
shows.
8 shows. Sorry, I read 5. So 8 shows. And then you were the first hip hop artist to ever go to the Middle East and go, and a whole bunch of other countries to perform as a hip hop artist. My question is what was the perception then from those crowds in the East to the West? Because we have our pop culture crowds in the West might have been so different from the East. So what was the difference that you saw in both of those worlds?
They loved it because it was something completely new and different for them. They had never, the only rap they had seen was on videos and on the radio and on TV. They had never heard anybody rap live before. And you have to understand the language barrier also. I remember like my hardcore fans and some of the ones that knew English, they could sing along with the songs, but a lot of people they just watched and they just had this look on their face. They were just like happy. They would clap all the time. They would clap at everything you did because they didn't really know what you were saying. The only song that everybody sung along with was Gangsters Paradise. I'm talking about even people that didn't speak English, they knew every word of Gangsters Paradise. Yeah. So that was easy. And it's funny. I would do an hour set and you could just see, I could see it in people's faces. They was waiting for Gangsters Paradise. They was just waiting for it. Even in the crowd, you can hear people say, Gangster Paradise, Gangster Paradise. They be saying it with an accent, like they that's the only song they really knew. And then, but of course, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Sweden, England, of course, Australia. They knew other songs. They knew Fantastic Voyage. They knew some of the album cuts. They knew Can of Corn. But when you're talking about Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Bahrain, Dubai, they speak. Everybody speaks English in Dubai. I'm gonna tell you what's crazy. Okay, here's a crazy thing about performing in the Middle East. When we first started performing in the Middle East, all the women would be on this side and all the men would be on this side. So anytime you did any type of thing that had sexual innuendo to it, you had to run to the side where the women were.
No way. No way.
Up in the air in front of a bunch of men, at least I'm not.
Right.
Just stuff like that.
And good for you being respectful in the culture too and understanding that, like that, and not going in and being like, I'm going to do this my way, but instead looking at it and going, I'm going to respect the culture while I'm performing and creating a show. It's amazing.
Listen, when I first started performing in all these different countries, it wasn't, I did respect the culture, but at the same time, you were going to respect the culture and that put your ass in jail. There's certain stuff you couldn't do.
Right.
I remember performing in Israel for the first time. I performed on they built a stage for Michael Jackson in this park. And the stage was so massive that they just left it there. They never took it down. They just left it there. So here I go. I'm in Israel performing, and I'm performing on the same stage that Michael Jackson used. Okay, so I'm walking from the back of the stage. This is the intro. And I did a little short verse. I did, I can't remember what song it was. It might have been 2 minutes and 28 seconds of funk. A tits get a tasket. That's all your ass get. Snap your CD and drop the pieces in your casket. My little Jack on, still bending corners, bucket shots on your block and sipping on Coronas. Young McDonald had a farm with a 6-4 suicide sitting in the barn with no alarm. Straight up collected it cool and calm. Crowbar in my hand, my skeleton brick still works like a charm. So
nice.
that's a one verse song. I would do that. And then I would go straight into Fantastic Voyage. So here's the thing. So I'm walking to the front of the stage, and as soon as the first notes of Fantastic Voyage came on, check this shit out. Boom! There was this roll of thunder. Seriously, it was about. So now, when I started, it was about 810 degrees. People were fainting, getting heat exhaustion, passing out. You see people getting carried out by the paramedics and shit. So there was this roll of thunder. Sky darkened a little bit. It started sprinkling. The temperature dropped about 15 to 20 degrees. And a water main broke in the middle of the crowd. I shot up about 30 feet in the air.
Wow.
In less than a minute, there was a 4-foot pool of water. And people was jumping in that shit, and they was going crazy. And this is what I did. I looked up at the sky and I said, and I mouthed, thank you. Because that shit was crazy.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I didn't even do the first verse of Fantastic Voyage because I was just like, God damn, what's really going on around this motherfucker? I said, okay.
Wow.
Okay, I didn't invoke the spirit around this motherfucker. I was like, oh shit, okay. Somebody up there like me. So then I got to the second verse. And I'm talking about I had so much energy. I was so on point. The 40 Thieves was on. We was on point. We did an amazing show. I'm talking about. It's gotta be this show has got to be in my top 10 shows of all time. I mean, we killed that shit. So by the time we got to the end of the show, and this is before Gangsters Paradise came out. This is before Gangsters Paradise came out, I think, if I'm not mistaken. We got to the end, and as we started the last song, clouds went away, temperature came back up, and by the time I started walking off the stage, it was 110 degrees again, and the show was over. And that shit was amazing. That was really amazing.
Can we talk a little bit about Gangsters Paradise? Because like you did MTV's Best Rap Video, Best Rap Performance for the Grammys in '96. Like Gangsters Paradise is so iconic. And you sampled it from Stevie Wonder's Pastime Paradise. And then Stevie said no in the beginning. How did you convince Stevie Wonder to be able to sample from it and then be able to use it? Because you had this combination of hip hop and gospel and something that really hasn't been done before. You were really one of the first people to do that. So how did you get Stevie to agree?
Money talk bullshit.
Fair enough.
Money talk like this. And bullshit talk like this.
Stevie.
It was like, but money. I'm listening.
Stevie took damn near all the he took 95% of the publishing on the music side.
Wow.
The producer of Gangsters Paradise didn't fucking get shit, but he got $25,000 up front, which I got $100,000 for the song. I gave him $25,000 and I gave LV $25,000. I kept 50. And and I don't think he saw much more than that. And then the other 5% probably went to me, and yeah. And then Tommy Boy got some of that as well. So I probably got 3% and 3.5%. Tommy Boy got 1.5%. I'm not exact. I don't remember exactly what the actual numbers were at this time, but
so during that time too, you had, Tupac was still alive, like all these other hip hop artists were still alive, and you came out with something that was so different and so mainstream, and it hit hard before everyone else did. Did you expect it to do that? Most of the time I know artists are like, they have no idea. But what happened then after that? Like, and what did all the other artists say to you? Did you hear from Tupac? Did you hear from Biggie? Did you hear from all of them? Were they siding with you because you had this conversation of East Coast and West Coast as well that was going on too? So a lot of questions there, but did they side with you? Yeah.
I was super excited about Gangsters Paradise after I recorded it, but nobody else was really.
Really?
Tommy Boy definitely wasn't. They believe me, if Tommy Boy had knew Gangsters Paradise was going to do what it did, they would not have let it. They would have went harder on Disney because Dangerous Minds act was a Disney film, unbeknownst to most people. Disney, they put up the money for it or whatever. It went through another company, but I think it was a Disney, something Disney had acquired. And there was this lady named Kathy Green, and she did acquisitions for Disney. She went out and found music for their films. And as soon as she heard the song, she wanted it. So I was in the process of making that deal. So I had sent Tommy Boy the song. I played it for him over the phone first for my A&R. His name is Ian Stedman, that was his name. I played it for him, and he said, "You know what? Send it to me because I can't really hear it. I can't really tell." So I sent it to him. A couple of days later, I called him back. I was like, "So, what you think of the song, man, that I sent you?" They, collectively, everybody heard it, and everybody feels like, it's a good album cut. I said, "What?" I said, "Really?" I said, "Okay. So I guess you guys don't mind if I use it for a soundtrack then." They said, "Sure, go ahead." And that's how Gangsters Paradise got on the soundtrack, because they didn't even really like the song. And they'll deny that right now. But it's the truth. And so I think that Gangsters Paradise would definitely not been as big in America as it was without Dangerous Minds. And Dangerous Minds would have flopped without Gangsters Paradise.
Fair enough.
Because it was not testing well. It was going to be Michelle's. They were scared because they said that it was going to be Michelle Pfeiffer's first flop. But they pulled it out their ass and made it work.
What did the other artists say to you? What did other notable artists within the hip hop community? Because you were doing a sound that was different from theirs, and the beats and everything else. Did they embrace it?
Some people loved it. It was like, man, that shit is fire. And some people didn't say anything. Some people didn't. I have people that tell me I have people like hood cats. They tell me it wasn't really their favorite song. They didn't really like it. I got other songs that they like way better than that. But then you got some cats that swear by it. It's, Gangsters Paradise is a blessing and a curse.
Why is that?
Because you know what? It's people. I go online and look at some comments on some of my shit. And it's motherfuckers on there that call me a one-hit wonder. They act like that's the only platinum single I ever had.
That's not true.
I got 10 platinum songs. Some gold and some platinum. But a lot of people, that's all they know is Gangsters Paradise. So no matter what I do, after I did Gangsters Paradise, I don't care what I do. What I've done or what I do from here on out after that, I'll never be able to top that in most people's minds. Now, I don't feel like Gangsters Paradise is the best thing I've ever done. Definitely not. I've done hella songs I think are better than Gangsters Paradise, but you can't tell that to my core fan base. Gangsters Paradise is, to them, Gangsters Paradise is the greatest song of all time for a lot of people. Okay, so you got to understand, for a lot of people, the hip hop they had heard before Gangsters Paradise, either their parents wouldn't let them listen to it, or they didn't like the sound of it, or whatever the case had been. When Gangsters Paradise came out, it a lot of people that did not like hip hop fell in love with hip hop after they heard Gangsters Paradise. They gave hip hop a chance. I don't think that Crossroads by Bone Thugs and Harmony would have had a chance if not for Gangsters Paradise.
That's a good point.
As well as Extra Nation, Juice WRLD. A lot of these slower songs that people are doing with the singy kind of hooks, I don't think that without Gangsters Paradise, those songs would have a hard time being accepted because people didn't know how to listen. They didn't know, they wouldn't have known how to listen to it, I don't think. I can't say that for sure, but I think Gangsters Paradise opened a lot of doors for a lot of people, and they don't even realize it. I don't get a lot of credit for, I get credit from cats who really know hip hop and my core fan base, but I'm in a lot of people's top 5 and top 10 in Europe, but I don't. It's not many people. Okay, in America, some people, but you never see me on any lists for even top 20, not even in the top 20. I heard this song by CeeLo this morning where he named his man. I just hurt my feelings. I ain't gonna lie, I hurt my feelings because he mentioned motherfuckers that can't hold my fucking jock strap. He mentioned cats that ain't even on my level. He mentioned MCs that can't fuck with me at all. And he mentioned them, but he didn't mention me. And I thought that was my homeboy. I thought we was cool like that. But, you can't really be mad at somebody because of what they like. But I just thought that, shit, damn, he didn't mention my name. He mentioned some names, man. Let me think. I ain't gonna diss nobody. This is some motherfuckers that ain't nowhere near my level of intelligence or my level, my writing skills, my cleverness. Like they couldn't touch me with a 1 million foot pole.
Yeah.
But he mentioned their name in the song. It is what it is.
But let's take this moment and celebrate you and celebrate your accomplishments because you've got the platform.
Listen, it's not, that shit used to really bother me, and I mention it, but it don't bother me anymore because
good.
I listen to music, and I know where I stand in hip hop. I mean, I was really important. I'm important to hip hop, and I did some things that people will never do. Yeah. Even now, to this day, some of the places I've rapped at, I'm the only rapper that's ever been there.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so.
And you've bridged so much. You bridged so many different, from the hip hop community to the mainstream community. Gangsters Paradise was that track that bridged it, along with like Fantastic Voyage and like so many other ones that are amazing tracks. When I was a kid, and I told Marie too, I remember I had your CD in my hand. And I said, and if I had to tell my, younger self, my really younger self, that I would be talking to Coolio, when I'm 36, I probably would have been like, what? I probably wouldn't have believed myself. But those were things. It was really iconic for me, for a girl that grew up, and on a dirt road and, loved hip hop music, and wasn't surrounded in a community like that. That was you were a big inspiration for me in that side. So trust me, there's tons of us that feel that way and love your music and love what you did and what you're still doing too. So
what dirt road did you grow up on?
Pardon?
What dirt road you grew up on?
I did. I grew up in the country. Yeah, no, seriously. I grew up in the country. I grew up just outside of Toronto. So Marie and I live in Toronto. But I grew up on Concession 12 and just outside of Plattsville. So I was listening to hip hop. I was a country girl listening to hip hop music all the time. Pardon?
Concession 12, so your street didn't even have a name, huh?
It didn't even have a name. No, it was a dirt. Now it's not even paved yet. Still, it's half paved. So it's still, my parents are still in the country. But hip hop was a big thing for me, and I remember listening to you. And when I found out that your first tour was in Canada with Ice-T, I loved that. I think that's amazing. But also for me, you were really iconic for me, and I loved and love all of your music. So trust me, there might be people that might be saying that or feeling like CeeLo's not including you, but there's people like me. And trust me, there's tons of my girlfriends as well too that listen to your music all the time. We loved that single was the single that brought me to find you, and then to hear all your other music as well too. But you also had such a Yeah, and you had such a vibe. And Coolio, you do. That's the thing. You know,
That's
during
it.
that
We
time, the
recognize you.
hair, the style, the everything from lyrically, even to the way it sounded when you brought gospel music in. Like, that's iconic, and you should remember that.
Yeah. And I'm like, let's go on a trip across Canada. We're in Waterloo, Ontario, and we're going to go all the way over to Prince Edward Island, PEI, where Fantastic Voyage, I found as a child on a single, like one of those cassette tapes that was just a single, that
Right.
the record store, there was one record store in my town, had gotten completely by accident. It just popped in, because I mean, I grew up in a town where mostly people were listening to country music. Like, hip hop was not a thing. There was two things there. There was a random Erykah Badu CD that was like an acoustic thing, and then I had found Fantastic Voyage on a single cassette. I bought two of those things, bought them both, and I took them home. And I was such a cool girl, because they were like, I heard this song on television, and at the time, and Chrissy's heard the story too, we had Much Music at the time, which is Canadian MTV. Back home when I was little, we only had it for half a day. Half of the day was religious programming. The other half of the day was Much Music.
You know, back in the 90s and the 2000s, the radio in Canada was really pushing hip hop and R&B strong. And then like, it was like 10 years later or 5 years later, it switched up and went to rock and went alternative, and then it's always kind of stayed like that. Has done dance music and EDM, but hip hop on the radio hasn't been as strong as it was in the 90s and the 2000s. But that will change. That will change, because Toronto's underground hip hop scene will make that change, like it did in the 90s and the 2000s.
Like,
well, yeah, that's crazy.
yeah. I mean, the hip hop scene in the city has always, I would argue, has always been flourishing, but underground, and that there hasn't been necessarily enough people to get the word out or to get those songs off of mixtapes that were being sold on corners. I think there's a lot of unsung heroes that kind of reside in the city. I remember the story of how Flow 93, which was the country's first Black-owned hip hop channel radio station in all of country, and they were denied a permit for years because they felt that it didn't contribute to the cultural fabric or mosaic of Toronto, and in turn they were denied for things like country channels, who they felt like fit that mandate a little bit better. So when they finally did get it,
that's all about. No, that's all about. No.
Yeah, right. And
it don't come off.
But let's move from hip, like that conversation, and I wanted to ask you, like, where do you think hip hop is going to go next? I know we have like trap music is huge right now, but in terms of the 90s, there was a different soul to hip hop and rap. Do you feel like that's going to come back at all? We're going to get away from this vanity music?
Everything goes in a circle. First of all, and I hate to be the one to say this, but the reality of it is that things in this world are going to get much worse before they get better. Okay, so pretty soon it's not going to be any room or any place for what I call rich boy rap, or my what you possession rap, my possessions, what I have, my money, my car. That shit's gonna be out, because it's gonna go back to conscious rap at some point. Because first of all, in this world, everything goes in a circle, especially music, clothes, the trends. They everything comes full circle. So lyricism is already coming back. And like I said, people it's gonna be so many people that don't have anything.
Yeah.
That nobody's gonna give a fuck about that. People are gonna they don't want to hear music that they can identify with, and it's gonna open up a door for a new Public Enemy style group. There's gonna open up a door for another NWA, another KRS-One, another Coolio, another Wu-Tang Clan. That the group is gonna come back. Hip hop groups are gonna come back. Two-man tag team like Run DMC, that kind of hip hop's gonna come back. Not in that style, but it's definitely gonna be. It's definitely gonna have to do that. And I'm not, listen. My parents didn't like the music I listened to. Their parents didn't like the music they listened to. I was online one day, and it was this whole conversation going on Facebook about mumble rap, and people was going in. They were going in, and finally, I didn't get involved. I just was reading the comments, reading everything, and finally there was a voice. Somebody came out and said, "Hold on. Why are you talking about these kids' music?" They say, "Your mama didn't like the music you listen to. And they mama didn't like the music they listen to. You're not supposed to like this music right now because it's not for you with your old ass." He said, I'm 39 years old. I don't really like it, but I do understand. He said, this is their music. Let them have their music. Let them do their thing. Because that's how it goes. And then he said, mumble rap. Yeah, okay. He said, you got to understand, a lot of these rappers are track babies. A lot of them come from their whole families did drugs and alcohol on both sides. He said, and why y'all, he said exactly like this. He said, why y'all motherfuckers talking that shit? He said, understand this. You should be mad at yourself because y'all motherfuckers was the ones selling their mama's crack in the 90s. He said that shit. And I was like, oh. I was like, oh, shit. I was like, oh, that shit was real as fuck. I was like, damn. And that's what, that changed my opinion. Yeah. I started listening closer to what motherfucker, because at first I didn't like a lot of the stuff that people was doing. But when he broke it down like that, I was like, damn. And I started listening to the way some of these guys, and he's right. He's absolutely right. Exactly what he said. And I was like, damn. I was like, shake my head. Ain't that what a bitch? He's right. He's absolutely right. So I see what's going on now being more refined and becoming more lyrical. And I see conscious hip hop coming back and being strong. Now, you have to understand this. You do know that. I hope you know this, that the whole way the reason why hip hop has become the way it is because it was by plan and design. They did it on purpose.
Why do you say that?
I'm gonna tell you. Remember, conscious rap was mainstream, right? And gangster rap, sensationalism rap, rapping about shot rap was underground. Okay? All of a sudden, it flipped. Now conscious rap is underground. When you're talking about some shit that can help people or take their mind in a different place or help a kid understand life, that shit's underground. They don't play that on the radio anymore.
Yeah.
There was a reason for that. The music industry is fucked up right now. It's not the music industry. The music industry is Satan. The music industry, they put out the music where people rap about drugs and chilling and fighting and fucking and drinking on purpose because it influences the children to want to do these things, to want to go and take a Xanax, to want to go and get some alcohol and get behind the wheel, to want to fuck 100 bitches and get AIDS or have 10 babies, or to make motherfuckers want to go and be a thug or a gangster and go kill their brother and kill the motherfucker that lived down the street from them. They did it on purpose because guess what? So these people are gonna eventually do something and they're gonna go to jail. Some of the bigger record companies invested millions into the prison industrial complex. So they're putting out music to influence people to do stupid shit so that they go to prison.
I have a question. Do you think then, like during that time, because like we have cannabis as a counterculture too, and that all combines into the war on drugs and everything else. Do you think like Suge Knight and all of those other artists, because Suge Knight was pushing hard for more gangster hip hop, do you think that he was part of that and not realizing that it was part of the industrial complex and like war on drugs and all of those things? Did Suge know that, or did Suge just try to change something because he still wanted it to be underground and thug?
I can't say he did or he didn't because I don't know for sure. Right. If you go on YouTube and you look at something that Crazy Bone did a podcast. He spoke to a gentleman that was privy to a meeting that happened, I think, in the late 90s, early 2000s, late 90s, where a bunch of record company execs and other influential people in the music business and radio, they had a meeting and they talked about what I actually just said. They had a meeting about it. And the cat that was privy to the meeting, he said he couldn't fucking believe what he was hearing.
Wow.
He said at one point, somebody pulled out a gun. It was like, calm the fuck down, because motherfuckers couldn't believe what they was hearing. And they got upset, started talking shit. So they escorted this person out. Eventually, everybody that wasn't with it, they got up and walked out. But they had to sign an NDA, so they couldn't talk about it. So this person that told Crazy Bone about this, he wouldn't get, Crazy Bone wouldn't give his name, nor who he was affiliated with or anything like that. But he said this was told to him verbatim by someone that was actually at this meeting.
Wow.
And they said they geared hip hop away from conscious. And listen, now I talk about gangster shit, but I also talk about real shit. This is the way I approach hip hop. You give people what they want, right? But while you giving people what they want, you can't give people too much of what they want. You gotta mix it in with some of what they need. So I tried to walk that line. It's a fine line that I was walking. I tried to give people what they want and keep it real about what I went through in my neighborhood and the gangster shit that happened and some of the bad shit that happened. But also at the same time, I tried to come back with songs that were going to motivate people to be better people. And I think I always looked at it like this. if you have the opportunity to be heard by millions of people around the world, I feel as any artist, you have an obligation to these people to give them something that they can use in their life that's positive. You have a responsibility. That's just how I feel. Now, you have other artists that say, fuck that. That's not my responsibility to teach your children. It's not my responsibility I say what the fuck I want. And if I just want to talk about negative shit all the time, then that's what I'm gonna talk about. And then, like, you hear a lot of hip hop now, the shit is depressing. A lot of hip hop now fucking depresses me when I hear it. I'm like, damn, what the fuck is this?
Yeah. It's not the same, and also someone that loves hip hop, later hip hop, new hip hop, it's still great. It's changing. I think the females have a different perspective than they've ever had. Like Foxy Brown started all that in Lil' Kim, and now we've got Cardi in them, and they're doing something different. But I look at the other forms of hip hop, and I miss you, and I miss, looking even how like Kanye's changed, and like all of them. I miss that older form, but I think that's going to come back, and I hope it does, because people love it. Yeah, even people that are like teenagers still listen to old school hip hop in all different forms of old school hip hop.
But I guarantee you, it's gonna come back, but it's gonna be a fucking knockdown, drag out. It's gonna be a knockdown, drag out fight to get the bullshit off the radio.
Yeah,
because that's not what the record companies want. They want to keep the bullshit going. They want to keep the turmoil up.
Yeah.
It's funny. This is the first time I spoke about this in a public forum, because
we're happy it's with us.
We're grateful for it.
There was a time when I didn't give a fuck. I'd say what the fuck I felt no matter what. But that, I'm going to be honest with you. I started talking about a lot of different kind of things towards the around, especially after Gangsters Paradise, after my voice carried a long way and people were really listening to what I say. I started speaking a lot of truth about a lot of things. And they came, I'm not gonna say, I don't know who it was, but somebody came after me. They came after me, and they tried to destroy me.
Mm-hmm.
I was this close to being named the ambassador of hip hop for the United Nations. I was about 2 weeks out from being named as the ambassador for the United States, and I went to jail for a gun. I had my children in the car. I just brought them back from McDonald's and was dropping them off, and the police got behind me. I was parked already. They pulled up behind me because my tags were expired on my Hummer. And they asked to search my car. I said no. And they said, well, we can search it anyway because you don't have any tags on your car, so we have the right to search it. And my license was expired. This is all shit that happened when I was on the road. So I haven't seen my kids in 45 days, and I take them to McDonald's. They were little kids at the time. And I went to fucking jail. And of course, I went to jail, got caught with a gun. The United Nations shit, that shit was out the door. That shit wasn't, it killed that. Yeah. So, and then they started coming after me. They started fucking with me all the time. Because I was talking about shit they didn't want me to talk about. And then they for a minute, they silenced me. They silenced me. They radio just stopped playing my shit. But I don't think it wasn't because of me. Hip hop, I was too conscious and positive at the time, and the radio shifted from that. And I wasn't about to digress. I wasn't about to go backwards and start talking about shit that I didn't believe in no more.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I wasn't gonna do that. Nobody could make me do that. Just sell records. I just kept it going the way I saw fit. And you know, it kind of it derailed my career somewhat. You know, then of course, you know, Tommy Boy stopped paying their bills. They stopped doing the payola, they stopped paying radio, and you know, a whole bunch, all kind of shit all happened at once. And take for instance, like Naughty by Nature. They disappeared after their third album too.
It's true.
We were all on Tommy Boy Records. After our third album, you didn't hear from us. And our third albums didn't do as well as our second albums, when they should have done better. It's called My Soul.
Do you just think that mismanagement then?
No, I started talking about I would not sell my soul for fame. And I started going deep into some other shit, and then they didn't want to. And then see, the third album for most artists is when you really start getting the money.
Yeah.
And most record companies sabotage artists' third album to make them have a bill on their fourth album.
Straight up, we're going to start. Okay, this is what's going to happen. This is actually, for anybody who's tuning into the show for the first time, this is our second exploration of hip hop through time. And we're doing several of these shows. Number two. It's so nice. We had to do it twice. And the first season, we interviewed DMC from Run DMC, and we talked about the whole genre of new school hip hop and what it was to come up from the streets and right onto MTV, and the influence that had on a whole generation throughout the 80s. Now, we did our interview with Coolio, and we're in a whole new phase, which is like the phase immediately after new school, which is kind of like,
we're in the 90s hip hop era.
Correct. We are. And it's different, right? So,
well, yeah, it's developed and evolved, and it's become more mainstream. So we have these two different genres that are happening. You've got this new school music that started in the 80s, and then you're moving into this gangster era that's going into the 90s. But now when we look at mainstream that was happening within the 90s, what we realize is that radio was doing something very different than what the streets was doing. So when I say that, we had people like NWA, we had Run DMC, we had Public Enemy, we had all these different hip hop duos and groups and trios that were coming out with music that was a little bit different and a little more streets, along with Biggie and Tupac were like a huge time that became a little more controversial within the thug kind of hip hop gangster era. But radio was doing something different. Radio was only playing light hip hop. So that's the difference between what was happening from the streets, from hip hop culture, to then what was going mainstream. So when I say that, things that were popping at that time were DJ Jazzy Jeff, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Kid and Play. All these really, really light hip hop artists were playing on the radio, and a lot of these other mainstream artists that were doing a lot of gangster rap were not. So there was a little bit of this prejudice that was going on between the hip hop culture.
That's fair. I mean, I totally agree with that, because I mean, if I'm thinking back, my own experiences in the 90s, for sure, they were not playing harder hip hop on the radio during that period, which it's interesting because there's so many different parts to it. When you're dealing with hip hop, when we're going into the 90s, was like, they consider it, the scholars, the scholars and the gentlemen of the time, they consider it being the golden age of hip hop. That what was emerging from the period of the late 80s up until like the mid to late 90s was a very influential period for the development of the genre. However, how it was developing was exactly like you're saying. It wasn't necessarily happening on account of the radio, which I think this is an ongoing and consistent trend with hip hop. It's like radio and mainstream media is trying to control how the world interprets hip hop by controlling it, by having like this uber light, very easy listening hip hop. But meanwhile, out in the world, the artists are producing something that sounds very different. And there's a whole culture and there's a whole art that's around it. And I mean, like the 90s and had a whole, like, what was coming out was this Afrocentric Black nationalist rap that was really dominant, in addition to songs about people's experiences living in marginalized communities and aka ghettos, right?
Well, yeah, you're getting like NWA, obviously one of the most iconic hip hop groups, coming out and making points on things that were happening with them in the hip hop society, but radio wasn't really picking that up. They were playing all the light hip hop. For example, Coolio is one of them. Coolio is a little different because Coolio was the first person, and Gangsters Paradise was one of those really pivotal times that brought and really did around the world, brought hip hop into mainstream within the 90s, but throughout the world. He sold over 6 million copies of Gangsters Paradise. It went to Billboard. He was the first artist that we were saying in the interview that traveled internationally. He was also the first hip hop artist too to ever really bring out this gospel side of hip hop that's never happened before, that was into the mainstream radio. So the one thing about Coolio that I love that song personally, because that was like one of my go-to tracks when I was younger. He was showing this side that was really different. He was kind of showing both sides. He was doing stuff that was mainstream, but he was talking about something that was real, that was happening in the streets, and that was with gangsters and his actual experiences rather than this light hip hop. But he was using gospel as part of that to push it through. And he also covered Stevie Wonder's, what we talk about in the interview. You know, he sampled some Stevie Wonder, which is amazing. So he was the first person to ever really bring in that collab together. And that's why I find it a little bit different than something like, you know, we look at Will Smith, right? And how he did his stuff with, you know, DJ Jazzy Jeff. Like it's very different sound, but it also has a really true street element to it as well.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you. I think it's the nice thing is that we both have our own experiences with hip hop during this period. It was a formative music that was like, it was so influential for us. Like everybody listened to hip hop. And I found it was really interesting, like the most pivotal year for hip hop was 1996. In 1996, like everything was popping. That was like the best. If you ask anyone, they're like, this was the best year for hip hop. You had Tupac, you had Biggie, you had Nas, you had Jay-Z was coming up. Everybody that you know, all your favorite songs, everybody was coming up during this period. The 80s were very influential in introducing us to the genre. And the 90s were really influential for developing the genre. And like, that's where Coolio is so important. Like he created, like you said, he had the gospel motifs in his song, and he created a very mainstream taste of like poetry from the street. Like this was his life and this is what we were experiencing. And I think that needs to really be appreciated. And then also, who else was coming up in the 90s? Like out of some of the influential songs of that entire period, we have Wu-Tang Clan, Cream Get the Money, like that.
Bills, y'all.
And they revolutionized. They completely flipped the game. You know, these group of these guys from Staten Island, they came for it, and they completely flipped up what we knew about rap. 1993, if we go back to 1993 for a second, West Coast rap and its summertime sounds were filling the airwaves. Like radio was playing songs that people could get behind. Radio was playing songs that weren't necessarily controversial. And then you have like Wu-Tang Clan coming out with these like raw, grimy beats, martial arts themes. They're like a little bit of everything in hip hop all mixed into one.
Yeah.
And BBC said there was like they were the past, the present, and the future all wrapped up at once. And it was a collective of rappers. You had like ODB, Raekwon, Ghostface Killah, Method Man, Capadonna, RZA, like you I can't even name them all. Like those were probably obviously I think mine were as everybody else's favorites. But they just came out on the scene and they flipped it up. The 90s was all about, I've said this before, this is about social consciousness. It's about Afrocentric, nationalistic themes. It's about pride and using the art to kind of get that vibe out. And then at the same time, it's about pushing the boundaries and bringing reality and realism and really allowing people to kind of to have a glimpse at the day-to-day lives of individuals who, you know, are again, like they're living like Gangsters Paradise. They're telling the stories of what they're living like in these communities. And that I think is a really important thing.
Yeah. Also the other time in the 90s, you can say you love him. You can say you hate him. He started a trend. But there was some culture appropriation going on a little bit. Vanilla Ice. Vanilla Ice was played on the radio so much. So that's something that we're seeing. So we have all this East Coast, West Coast, gangster hip hop going on. You're getting this gospel that's coming on air as well. That's getting picked up as lighter hip hop. But you're also getting people like Vanilla Ice that are coming out. Also, you're getting some MC Hammer at that time too, but Vanilla Ice is one of them. He sold over 11 million copies of his album, and he was played worldwide as well. So, and people would call that a cultural appropriation. But I will say, as much as Vanilla Ice came out and I laugh at it now. He did open the doors for people like Eminem, and that's where we see artists now today, where that's kind of changed and it's a different respect. I would say that I don't know if Eminem would agree with me or not. It doesn't matter if he does or not, but he kind of opened up that door, and but that was one of the first times that you were seeing white rappers within a hip hop genre that was predominantly Black.
Yes. Vanilla Ice, like there's a whole, I think like the whole history and like taxonomy of white rappers are just interesting in general. As a cultural, as an art form, you know, it's kind of like your entitlement to it comes from your association with a grittier lifestyle. Like Eminem didn't have the easiest life. I don't know much about Vanilla when I say Vanilla Ice's background, but it's like I don't know what to say about them.
But I think when we look at where hip hop's evolved during the 90s, it was majority a lot of you know, it's Black culture that was doing hip hop music. Yeah. And so when you're seeing now that they're accepting, and obviously it was really controversial during that time because a lot of people loved Vanilla Ice, but a lot of people didn't like him. Obviously the gangster side would not like the light hip hop that he's doing. And it was too pop and too mainstream, but he was opening the door for other backgrounds and ethnicities to do, you know, to be accepted into hip hop. Because later on we see Eminem, but totally agree that it was totally two different upbringings and totally two different ways of presenting. Like they are totally opposites when it comes to the craft, but they're both doing the craft.
They're both doing the craft. There's like an acceptance. I think Eminem got his dues. Lord Jamar said that white rappers are just guests in the house of hip hop. Right?
That's hilarious. Yeah.
It's a borrowed art. This is not yours. You're just here. And you know, and there's always been white rappers. Like 80s had the Beastie Boys. They started off as a punk group, and then they were influenced by Run DMC.
Yeah.
We obviously like Vanilla Ice Vanilla Ice was hot for a minute, like whatever that was, 1991. And he had a song in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movie. And like he was, for a brief moment in time, he was it. And then obviously like Eminem, he's probably the best-selling rapper, one of the best-selling rappers ever. And people love him for his lyrical dexterity. I think the difference is like you have the bookends of the Beastie Boys and Eminem. And I really think this is an interesting conversation because I never really thought about it a whole lot. But if you have the bookends of Beastie Boys and Eminem, both incredible talents unto themselves. And then like Vanilla Ice is like the guy that's sampling.
He's pop rap.
He's pop rap and he's like sampling David Bowie. And he's very like, it's hard to take him seriously. That was the thing about Vanilla Ice. He had catchy tunes, but it wasn't, you couldn't take him as silly. And now it's like, Post Malone, arguably, he says he's not rap. Mac Miller, who's one of my favorite artists, unfortunately, rest in peace, Mac Miller. We miss you. Lil Dicky, like they still are. Mac Miller, I think, is a wonderful talent. He's gone before his time. So sad, but it doesn't. The thing about white rappers is that yes, they're on borrowed time. They're guests within the genre. They don't, I feel like it's very important to understand that this is an art form that the Black community deserves to have dues on. And I really think that we need to celebrate those heroes first and foremost, because they're the ones that are grinding it out and this is theirs. Like I don't think there's a problem with saying that at all. But just because the white rappers have been around for a long time, it doesn't mean that it's not uncomfortable. And the discomfort with that is the political side of it.
See, I also think that we should look at hip hop as being multicultural now. That's how I look at the genre, that anybody can do hip hop, right? It's a type of being, it's a culture, it's a lifestyle, rather than it's a race or a color. So in my mind, for sure, people can do hip hop. And if they're, for example, like you can be anybody and go through a struggle, be growing up in specific areas, and doesn't even mean to do hip hop music. It has to come from a struggle. I think that's it. And some people would agree and some people wouldn't, but hip hop does usually start with making a comment on what is going on around them and in society and what's happening. So you're getting a lot of people that do love hip hop and are talking about their struggles on a day to day. But now what we're seeing in mainstream hip hop that's going today, not so much, and the 90s too is part of that, is we're seeing this switch, because right now in hip hop, it's still really light and fluffy. It is not back to gangster hip hop. It is not back to street hip hop. It's not back to culturally talking about what's going on. It's still about cars and money. And that also, one day we'll talk about this, but that's part of the 2000s. They started to really fluff it up, P. Diddy and the rest of them. But it starts to get lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter as we go through mainstream. As it turns from pop, it's not as gangster anymore. It's very much about cars, money, and clothes and women. And it's still sitting in that house today. And I hope that one day it kind of goes back to the element of not so much street, goes back to the moment of talking about what's going on around them and in society today and what's happening to people, rather than what people are wearing and what cars are driving.
Well, I think there's evolutions with every art form. There's evolutions. It goes through cycles, right? We have periods of great wealth and excess, and then we have periods of struggle. And that is really a reflection. Pop culture has always been a reflection as who we are and what we're driven to in society. I think once we're coming out of, quote, COVID and the impact of this part of our lives, I think we're going to be taking a look at music in a very different perspective. We might not necessarily be really drawn to the decadence of these like high flashy lives, because we just can't relate to it. Like it's a reflection of who we are in this world. And I think just to go back to like the white rapper existence, it's a really, really interesting topic to me, because it's not just like cultural appropriation, for sure, a need of respect, but there is like the history of what it is to create music as a culture and have that music taken away from you by white artists. And this was happening repeatedly over the generations. I mean, how many people love Elvis's Hound Dog? You ain't nothing but a hound dog. Or Blue Suede Shoes. Well, Hound Dog obviously I think most of us know, like, that's not an Elvis song. That was never an Elvis song. That song was stolen from Big Mama Thornton. Like, but she wasn't entitled to have the success with it that Elvis did because of her race. She wasn't entitled to, some cases, have a writer's credit on the song because of her race. So that is a real wound that we have to understand is like carried. So when
that's the whole thing about the 90s is that they didn't really know what was going on. The 90s is so controversial in the way that they would talk, things that they would say. You know, coming out of the yuppie era, they were just trying to, I don't know, they were saying anything and doing everything. So I don't think Vanilla Ice knew that he was culturally appropriating. I think he was just doing it because he liked the craft, you know, and loved the genre and also liked pop music because, let's be honest, Vanilla Ice, you did, because your music's pop. But I don't think he knew he was culturally appropriating, and I don't think he was doing it intentionally. I blame radio. This is who I blame. I don't blame the artist. I blame radio for picking it up and pushing it through and not playing a mix of both genres because they wanted to sit to a certain tempo and hit to a key audience that for sure could have been a lot more Caucasian. I don't know, but they wanted to go light, and I blame radio. I don't blame the artist. I blame radio.
I think it's a whole system. I don't think appropriation has never been like when we, in episode 1 on our hip hop, our first episode, sorry, on hip hop, we talk about Rodney Dangerfield, like nobody knew what appropriation was. The mainstream didn't. It doesn't mean that it wasn't as deplorable. Now, this is really just like the tension that exists with the entry on it and the mainstream success of white rappers, especially in the 90s, when it's coming out and there are individuals that are working hard to try and change the face of the art in the mainstream, within mainstream pop culture, right? They're doing their best. When, from the perspective of somebody, we have to see an individual that is like white, pop, just fits into this kind of like riffing off of motifs from MC Hammer and going out and doing it and having success at that. The impact is that, he's having huge mainstream success.
Yes.
When there's other people that are not having it, and he's doing it off of a culture that is not typically associated with his own. And it's also from a culture that has experienced a lot of cultural theft over the years. Right. So it's kind of like, even like to a certain degree, like I always feel a little bit uncomfortable talking about, because I'm on an observer on the outside looking in, trying to understand the cultural context of what and the impact of what we have done on to the Black community and to hip hop, our influence as consumers.
For sure. But that's looking at it now. And but during the 90s, I don't think that's the whole point of evolution.
Oh, for sure.
They were not reflective. They were just trying to do whatever that would stick. Now, 90s, for sure, I agree. We have to look at it and say, hey, what is called cultural appropriation and what wasn't? But during that time, they didn't know. And again, I don't blame the artists at all. I blame the mainstream media, and I blame pop culture during that time for paying more attention to white artists than paying attention to other crafts. But the other problem here too, though, is not so much when you get gangster rap that's swearing and maybe a little more violent, for sure they're not going to want to play it on the radio. And that's where you're getting in a little bit of a struggle. But it also doesn't mean that, and there was a lot of songs, the California Love, tons of songs like from Tupac and Biggie that were played on the radio as well, and that were somewhat mainstream still. Like, that's for sure, they got the most attention out of that. But there was that battle that was going on between light hip hop and gangster and more street hip hop. And unfortunately, the lighter hip hop won, because that's where we see it today.
And it's like the 90s was a major transitional period for hip hop.
It was.
We had hip hop. We were being challenged how we thought about the music form, how we thought about the artist, and how it was shifting. And again, like one of my favorite artists, I said this before, I've said this 1,000 times, Arrested Development. They were a part of that Afrocentric, nationalistic curve that taught me history, and it gave me knowledge, and it was enriching, and Nas and all of these.
There's a lot of different sounds coming out then.
Yeah, there's a lot. And they were talking about like, it was conscious political rap. And was incredible. It's a voice that was coming out in response to American capitalism. It was coming out in criticism of Reagan's conservative political economy. There were so many things that were coming out, and there was a lot of pride, a lot of pride in one's own culture and being able to celebrate that openly. And then it had an impact because, you know, the world was starting to get acquainted with this, and they were starting to demand change, and they wanted to start seeing more diverse faces and hearing diverse voices. So I think what hip hop has given us as a culture is immeasurable.
Can we segue into another sync now?
We can segue into any sync you want.
Say we segue into fashion.
Fashion.
Because during the 90s, there were tons of different fashion trends that came out that we still see today, that everybody still wears. First one, Timberlands. Everybody still wears a Timberland. A Timberland started in the 90s, but what originally started as the 90s, which I think is crazy, it was intended as a construction worker's boot. And then it gained major traction in New York through drug dealers, which is like, right? That's what I said, because they wanted a strong and sturdy boot so that they could wear during the streets that would keep their feet dry. And then people like Biggie, Tupac, Nas, and Aaliyah, and tons of hip hop and R&B artists started to pick up the trend. And then that's how the Timberland moved into mainstream. And now it still stays mainstream within hip hop culture and just fashion in general. I had a pair of Timberlands. I still love Timberlands. And I think it's pretty iconic for a footwear brand that wanted to start as a construction boot.
My whole thing, because I was very much like, the thing is that I was always very much into like that, into the Afrocentric world. That was just kind of like where I sat, because I was multi-ethnic and looking for identity, and I was seeing people who had that. I was like, oh wow, like I really love this. So my brand in the 90s was Cross Colors. I had Cross Color jackets. I loved Cross Colors, and Cross Colors was a brand that was launched in 1989 by Carl Jones. And it was, the whole premise behind it was so 90s. It was all about like, this is clothes without prejudice, which totally aligned with my MO at the time. Because I'm like, you know, I'm like Arab, and everyone thinks I'm inherently violent, and everyone thinks my food smells weird, and they think I look funny. And like, there was always like these things. So I was like, I really can get behind this brand. But what I didn't realize was the influence of Cross Colors on that whole genre is that it helped to establish a fashion market based around Black youth. And it used clothes to project political messaging. It was like this awesome, and the clothes were great. I really hope my mom didn't toss out my jacket. I keep meaning to ask her, like, do you have it? And I kept the label. I put the label up on my wall because it had the Cross Colors manifesto on it, and it was awesome because it was all about how like we are one, we live in this world, and you know, in order to bridge gaps, you have to be willing to like, you know, to get into other people's worlds. And it was so incredible. But what I didn't realize is that, you know, it was also like one of the first major fashion lines that was a Black owned business. So it wasn't necessarily it was not a part of like, it wasn't a part of a lifestyle. It was a part of a movement. That's kind of like that is my world of hip hop in the 90s. It was on that like movement, like your stories are like, you achieve your high achieving stories. Like, this is where I jive. This is where I sit. So
the other really notable fashion trend that happened in the 90s was the oversized t-shirts. I remember that it stayed for the longest period of time, even into the 2000s. But the oversized t-shirts started in New York City and LA and Chicago, because generally kids that were living in poorer areas would get hand-me-downs from their brothers and sisters. So they usually wouldn't fit. So they'd have this like oversized t-shirt that they would wear. And then obviously it started becoming a trend within the fashion community, within the hip hop culture. So then it just kept going. And then now we see it still in mainstream. What was it? 2013, Kanye West did a collaboration with a French fashion house called APC, where he did
fashion show collaboration.
No, what would you call that? Like where Kanye West did a nod to this 90s hip hop trend where he did like this oversized t-shirt. So it was like a humble little, hey, remember that. Remember where we came from. Remember where this started from. And also one thing I love about Kanye West, and I've said this to you before outside of the podcast, he does those things that outside of Kanye West being super controversial, I do respect his mind when it comes to fashion for his comments on society. So for example, like creating that oversized t-shirt and then doing it with a fashion designer and giving a little bit of a humble respect to that 90s moment into that generations, into what happened in the cities that he grew up in, being underprivileged, but then also having clothes that have holes in them and getting all these people to wear them around the world, and like people that are spending so much money, which I think is hilarious. They're spending hundreds and thousands of dollars or hundreds of dollars on t-shirts that have holes in them. And they're like, oh, look at me, it's cool. It's like, no, Kanye West is a little bit telling you, and he's kind of playing a joke on you, I think. And he's saying like, hey, and that's fashion, and he made it fashion. How many people can say that they can put holes in their clothes and then sell them for thousands, hundreds and thousands of dollars? Like, it's super smart. And that's one thing I love about Kanye West, is that he'll always bring it back to original hip hop street culture and where it came from and from its roots. And he'll make sure that he'll subtly tell you that. And you have to kind of look at the fashion and look what he's trying to say through it, because he won't come out and say it all the time. He'll do it through his craft, which I think is really smart.
Yeah. I mean, that's the way of the artist. Just put it out there.
He's an artist. Totally is. Controversial as crap, but he is an artist. Love him or hate him.
Yeah. I mean, artists are important because they just kind of make you think about what you're okay with and what you're not okay with. And it really challenges your notion of the world around you. Kind of, they're the ones that push society forward, truthfully. The artists are always there to make us think. And I mean, what else? We have, if we're talking about like trends, I mean, the Kangol hat was really big. LL Cool J was always wearing it. The baggy pants, like we're talking about more R&B artists, but TLC and Aaliyah had like the baggy pants and the little crop tops, and there is like baseball caps and throwback jerseys and bright colored garments, and it was really kind of this incredible time where it was exploring and accepting and being all cool in mainstream. I would say arguably in this way for the first time in history. So if you take a look at the 90s and think the syncs are happening there and think, yeah, fashion is incredible. Language is incredible. Like slang that's coming out, the sounds that are coming out, the influence that it's having on what we consider to be appropriate and what's not being appropriate. But
it was the generation of learning.
Yeah, it was a generation.
We had to go through the 90s to learn what not to do later on.
Well, we had to have, there was a period of expansion. Like we had to, there had to be a period where there just deserved to be a period where Black Americans, Black North Americans were able to access their culture and explore what that meant to have cross colors. Right, as a brand that represented clothing without prejudice and bright colors, to be able to explore like African motifs in fabrics, to be able to have, nods to your culture, and to be able to have that on a mainstream stage without someone to say to you, oh, no, maybe you shouldn't have the afro, or maybe you shouldn't have your hair in braids. Like, no, everybody had the ability to kind of explore and push it out. And I don't think.
Yeah, explorative is probably the best term to capture the 90s. Everybody was exploring with new sounds, new fashion, new technology,
Yep.
new words, new film and television, new ways of doing things. I guess every generation is an exploratory generation, but the 90s was a very special time. Yeah. Well, I say we leave it there.
So it's always like a delight to be able to get into some of these topics because it's
so, Marie, where can people find us?
They can find me on the northwest corner of Bloor and Bay every Monday, Wednesday, Friday between the hours of 6 and 7 p.m.
That sounds horrible, Marie. Where can they find us, Marie?
They can find us online at Alt.Pop.Repeat.com. Also on social at Alt.Pop.Repeat, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, on YouTube, wherever you want to listen to us on your favorite podcasting platform. And if you're feeling frisky, you can come and find us on Patreon, patreon.com/Alt.Pop.Repeat, and you can donate to help us grow and evolve our show if you like what you hear. And yeah.
Till next time.
Sup.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Call me.